11 records shattered in a single game, not spread across a season, not accumulated over a career, all 11 gone in one night of basketball. Caitlin Clark accounted for 8 of them. Kelsey Mitchell grabbed one. Sophie Cunningham took another. And Tayasha Harris, a bench guard who hadn't scored in weeks, walked away with the final piece of history. But here's what makes this night different from every other record-breaking performance you've seen. This wasn't just about one player getting hot. This wasn't about a team facing a terrible defense or running up the score in garbage time against a struggling opponent. This was Indiana's entire roster clicking at the exact same moment, each player answering when their number got called, each one adding their own piece to a night that rewrote what's possible in professional women's basketball. And it all started with something that looked like it might derail everything. Before this game even reached halftime, Caitlin Clark grabbed her ankle and limped toward the tunnel while 17,000 people held their breath. Nobody knew if she was coming back. Nobody knew if this game was about to become a cautionary tale instead of a historic one. By the time the final buzzer sounded, Indiana had turned Dallas upside down and left the record book in pieces. Let's break down how a team that lost to Paige Bueckers and the Wings just months earlier came back and destroyed them in ways the WNBA has never seen before. Opening night of the WNBA season carries weight that regular games don't have. It's the first statement a team makes, the first impression fans get after months of waiting, and it's the kind of result that sticks with a roster way longer than it should. When Dallas walked into Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis and left with a win against the Indiana Fever, it wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. It was the Wings saying they belonged in conversations with the best teams in the league, and it was the Fever getting a reality check in front of their home crowd. For months after that opening night, that loss sat in the back of everyone's mind. Not the kind of thing players talked about constantly, but the kind that gets mentioned when these two teams line up again. Coaches remember it. Players remember it. Fans definitely remember it. And when the schedule brought Dallas back to Indianapolis on August 14th, it wasn't just another game on the calendar. It was a chance to fix something that had been bothering people since before the season really even got started. The weight of that history changed how both teams approached this matchup. Indiana wasn't walking into it thinking about the standings or playoff seeding. They were walking into it thinking about proving something. About showing that the first game was an outlier, a moment where Dallas caught them unprepared, where the Fever hadn't found their rhythm yet. Dallas, on the other hand, was walking in with confidence. They'd already beaten this team once. They knew they could do it again. That kind of confidence is contagious in a locker room, and it showed up in how the Wings started this game. Early in the second quarter, Dallas was hanging around like a team that knew exactly what it was doing. They were hitting shots, executing their offense, and playing with the kind of swagger that only comes from knowing you've already won this matchup before. The Fever weren't pulling away. If anything, it felt like this could turn into another gut punch. Another night where Indiana walked off their home floor wondering what went wrong against a team they knew they could beat. The building felt that tension too. Home crowds can sense when things aren't going right, when the energy isn't quite there, when momentum is drifting toward the other team. Gainbridge Fieldhouse is one of the loudest arenas in women's basketball when Indiana is rolling, but in those early stages against Dallas, there was this underlying nervousness. People were waiting for the Fever to take over. People were waiting for the moment when Indianapolis would remind everyone why they'd built this team around Caitlin Clark in the first place. But that moment didn't come in the first half. Instead, what came was something completely unexpected. Right before the halftime break, before Indiana could build any real separation, before this game could shift in their favor, everything changed. And not in the way anyone in the building wanted it to change. What makes this particular loss so significant is that Dallas didn't just beat Indiana. They beat them at home. They beat them early in the season when everything still feels possible, and they beat them convincingly enough that people noticed. The Wings had several players capable of carrying the load offensively. They had a dynamic scorer in Paige Bueckers who could go off at any moment. They had defensive schemes that gave Indiana problems. And when they left with a win, it sent a message that maybe this Fever team, as talented as they were, wasn't necessarily the favorite everyone thought they'd be. That message stuck around like an itch nobody could scratch. Coaches don't forget losses at home. Players don't forget losses to teams they should beat. And fans in Indianapolis definitely don't forget losses to visiting teams, especially not when those teams are led by someone like Paige Bueckers, who already had her own storyline with Caitlin Clark dating back to high school. So by the time these two teams lined up again on August 14th, there was real juice to this matchup. This wasn't Dallas coming to town for a random regular season game that nobody would remember by the playoffs. This was a rematch with actual stakes, with real narrative weight, with both teams knowing exactly what they were fighting for. Indiana wanted to prove that opening night was an aberration. Dallas wanted to prove they could beat the Fever twice. What neither team could have predicted was that Indiana would answer that question so definitively. They weren't just going to beat Dallas. They weren't just going to get their revenge. They were going to break the record book while doing it, and they were going to do it in front of their home crowd with every player on their roster contributing something meaningful to the outcome. The beautiful thing about sports is that sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning. Sometimes it's winning in a way that makes everyone remember forever why you deserve to win in the first place. That's exactly what Indiana did on August 14th. They took that opening night loss, they held it close for months, and then they channeled it into a performance that's going to be studied and talked about for years to come. That's the kind of narrative that makes sports worth watching in the first place. Picture the exact moment. It's late in the second quarter, maybe a minute or two before the halftime break. Caitlin Clark is doing what she does, moving around the floor, creating angles, looking to attack Dallas's defense. The Wings are trying everything they can to slow her down, switching bodies, doubling off the ball, making it as difficult as possible for Indiana's best player to get into a rhythm. Then it happens. Clark's moving laterally and her ankle turns underneath her. Not a catastrophic roll, not the kind of thing where players immediately collapse to the floor. Just a moment where her foot doesn't land quite right, where her body weight shifts in a way that doesn't feel normal. She grabs at the ankle almost immediately, and anyone watching knows instantly that something's wrong. You can see it in how she favors the foot walking. You can see it in the way she's holding her leg, protecting it, being careful not to put full weight on it. And then she heads toward the tunnel instead of the bench. In that moment, 17,000 people in Gainbridge Fieldhouse go silent. Not a scattered silence where some people are still talking. A complete, collective silence where the entire building is holding its breath. Because everyone knows what it means when Caitlin Clark walks off the floor with an injury in the middle of a game against a team that already beat them once this season. The broadcast starts throwing out theories immediately. Is it a roll, a sprain, something worse? The commentators are speculating, the analysts are talking, and everyone watching is doing the same thing. Is she coming back? How bad is it? What happens to Indiana's season if their best player goes down with an injury against Dallas of all teams? The mood on the Fever bench shifts instantly. This isn't a planned timeout where coaches are drawing up plays and talking strategy. This is a situation where teammates are glancing over at the tunnel between possessions, checking to see if Clark's coming back out. The energy that was building, the momentum that Indiana was starting to find, it all gets put on pause. The crowd, which should be getting louder as halftime approaches, gets quieter instead. People are watching the tunnel. People are wondering. People are worried. And there's a really good reason for that worry. The Fever know better than anyone what life looks like without Clark on the floor. They've played games without her this season. They've seen what happens to their offense when she's not running the show, when she's not making the right reads, when she's not attacking the rim and forcing defenses to collapse. Dallas has already beaten Indiana when Clark was fully healthy. What happens if she has to sit out the rest of this game? What happens if this injury is serious enough that it keeps her off the floor for the next few games, or worse? It's not just about one ankle injury. It's about the uncertainty that comes with it. It's about the Fever knowing that their window to prove something against Dallas, their window to get revenge for opening night, might have just closed. It's about the very real possibility that this game was building toward something special, and now it might be building toward heartbreak instead. The other players on Indiana's roster are feeling it too, because they know what the expectations are. They know that if Clark can't go in the second half, the onus falls on them to step up. Kelsey Mitchell knows it. Aaliyah Boston knows it. Everyone on that bench knows it. And they're watching that tunnel just as intently as the fans are, wondering what's about to happen, wondering if they're about to get thrown into a situation where they have to win a game without their best player. In situations like this, the announcers start talking about whether the injury might affect Clark's confidence when she comes back, if she comes back. Because that's another layer to this story. Even if the ankle feels okay, even if it's not seriously injured, there's always that mental component. There's always that moment where a player is a little bit tentative, a little bit careful, thinking about protecting the injury instead of just playing basketball. That hesitation can cost you possessions. It can cost you momentum. It can cost you a game. The Fever have to know they're running out of time before halftime. They have to know that if Clark doesn't come back out for the second half, they need to have already made up significant ground against Dallas. But that's not what's happened. The Wings are still hanging around. The game is still competitive. And now Indiana might have to finish the second quarter and go into halftime without any clarity on whether their season-defining moment is about to turn into a season-altering injury. That's the thing about basketball. Things can change in an instant. One awkward step, one moment where a player's body doesn't cooperate the way they expect it to, and suddenly everything is different. Suddenly, a game that felt like it was heading somewhere special feels like it might be heading somewhere tragic instead. The third quarter starts, and before anyone can really settle in, Caitlin Clark walks back out onto the floor. Not gingerly. Not testing it with a safe possession or a jumper from deep. She walks out like she's ready to play basketball, and then she proves it almost immediately by grabbing the ball and attacking the rim. The crowd goes from worried to electric in about 5 seconds, because Clark isn't easing back into the game. She's not being cautious or protective of the ankle. She's aggressive, she's pushing the pace, and she's making it clear that whatever happened in the second quarter, it's not going to slow her down in the third. Aaliyah Boston finds her for an early score, and Gainbridge Fieldhouse goes absolutely nuts. The building gets louder. The energy shifts. The crowd realizes that Indiana still has their best player, and now they're about to see what happens when Clark gets angry. But here's the question that hangs over those first few possessions. Is this smart? She just walked off the court with an ankle injury against a team that beat Indiana already. She could have sat the rest of the half, rested it, gotten it wrapped up, and made sure it wasn't going to be a problem. But instead, she comes back out firing in the third quarter. That's either the kind of decision that wins you a game, or the kind that costs you weeks of time dealing with a more serious injury. You can feel that tension in the building too. Everyone is watching a little too closely every time Clark plants on that foot. Everyone is paying attention to her movement, her cutting, her ability to explode toward the basket. Is she favoring the other side? Is she protecting the ankle without realizing it? Is she about to go down again? Then it stops being a question because Clark puts up 17 points in the third quarter alone. She goes 7 for 9 from the field. She's not just scoring, she's dominating. She's attacking Dallas's defense with purpose. She's getting to the rim, she's hitting shots off the dribble, she's running the offense and scoring at the same time. The game completely tilts in front of everyone's eyes. The Fever bench goes from nervous to loud. You can see it on the sideline. The energy completely changes. This isn't a team that's worried anymore. This is a team that realizes their star player is fine, that she's ready to go, and that she's about to take over this game. Dallas's lead disappears. The whole tone shifts in about 10 minutes of basketball. From a tense, uncertain game where nobody knew what was going to happen, to a blowout in the making where Indiana is starting to assert complete control. But that third quarter explosion was about way more than just Clark getting hot. It was the spark that ignited everything else. Because once Clark comes back out and starts scoring at that pace, once she starts attacking and creating and dominating, it opens up everything for her teammates. It makes Dallas's defense collapse. It creates space for other players. It forces the Wings to make adjustments that don't work. Mitchell starts getting her looks. Boston finds easier finishes in the paint. Harris gets opportunities in rhythm. The whole offense starts flowing the way Indiana's offense is supposed to flow when Clark is commanding the floor. And by the time the third quarter ends, Indiana hasn't just tied the game or taken a small lead. They've taken over. They've established that this is their game, that Dallas can't keep up, and that the records are about to start falling. What makes that third quarter so important isn't just the scoring. It's the message it sends. It tells Dallas that Indiana is not just going to win this game, they're going to dominate it. It tells the Fever's role players that their star is ready, that they need to match that energy, and that this is the moment where they make their statement against the team that beat them opening night. It tells the crowd that what they were worried about, the ankle injury, isn't going to be a problem. The psychological shift in that quarter is massive. Because Indiana goes from a team that's uncertain, that's worried about their best player being injured, that's not sure if they can win without Clark being fully healthy, into a team that's absolutely rolling. And Dallas has to feel that shift too. They have to realize that whatever adjustments they made for the first half, whatever worked for them in opening night, none of it is going to matter because Indiana is simply playing better basketball in every single way. By the end of the third quarter, this game is essentially decided. Indiana isn't just ahead, they're dominating, and the record book is already starting to change. Because Clark's 17-point third quarter, on top of everything else she's going to do in the fourth quarter, is going to push her into territory that no WNBA guard has ever been in before. The ankle scare that looked like it might derail this game has instead become the moment that defines it. Because once Clark proved she was fine, once she came back out and started dominating, everyone else on Indiana's roster realized this was the moment to make history. When you look at the final line from Caitlin Clark in this game, it reads like someone made a typo. 29 points and 10 assists on a night where she was dealing with an ankle injury, where she spent halftime in the locker room getting looked at, where she could have easily sat out the second half and nobody would have blamed her. But she came back out and put up numbers that don't match what's supposed to be possible for a point guard in professional basketball. That single stat line, that one night of 29 and 10, is the perfect example of what makes Clark's season so historically different from anything the WNBA has ever seen. Because scoring 29 in a night is impressive, but doing it while also distributing 10 assists at the point guard position, while also running the entire offense, while also defending against one of the best guards in the league. That's a different tier of production entirely. Here's where it gets really interesting. When you combine Clark's scoring and her assists, when you look at the total points produced by one player, either by her own scoring or by creating opportunities for her teammates, you get a number that sounds made up. 39.8 points produced per game, that's her season pace. No guard in WNBA history has ever touched that number, and it's not close. It's not like the previous record was 38 and Clark is at 39. It's a completely different universe. Diana Taurasi, one of the greatest scorers in WNBA history, never averaged anything close to that. Sue Bird, who ran offenses for years and was one of the best playmakers the league has ever seen, never got to that number. Maya Moore in her absolute prime, when she was winning championships and putting up some of the best seasons women's basketball has ever witnessed, never averaged a production rate like that. And Clark, in just her second full season playing professional basketball, is on pace to be the first. That 39.8 pace isn't a fluke from one hot game. It's a real number, built across dozens of games, built on the foundation of consistency that nobody else in the league is matching. She's averaging 21.7 points per night and 8.2 assists per night. Do that night after night, game after game, and you end up with a pace that rewrites what people think is possible for a point guard in this league. The Dallas game is exactly the kind of night that feeds that 39.8 pace. Clark finishes with 29 points and 10 assists. That's directly responsible for 39 points in one game alone. 29 that she scored, plus 10 more that she created by getting her teammates open and in position to score. Do that over and over across a season, and you get a number that doesn't fit into the box scores that the WNBA has used for decades to measure production. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because scoring 29 in a night is one thing, doing it consistently enough to rack up multiple 25-point games as a point guard is something else entirely. Point guards are supposed to set up the offense. They're supposed to get everybody else involved. They're supposed to chip in points when the moment calls for it, but they're not supposed to be the primary scorer. That's not their job description. That's not how basketball is supposed to work. Clark has flipped that entire job description on its head. She's scoring at a clip that you'd expect from a shooting guard, a player whose only real responsibility is to put the ball in the basket, while still running the entire offense, while still making the reads, while still controlling the game from the point guard position. She now holds the record for most 25-point games by a point guard in WNBA history. And it's not like she's got 25 or 26 of these games. She's got way more than that, which means she's not just having a historic season. She's redefining what it means to play the point guard position in professional women's basketball. Add on top of that the fact that she picked up her 20th career game with 20 points and 10 assists against Dallas, and you start to understand the scope of what's happening. No other player in WNBA history has more than 10 of those games in their entire career. Clark already has double that, and she's done it in just 83 games. That's not a gap between her and the next closest player. That's an entire different tier of production that nobody else in the league has come close to. She's also got 13 career games with 25 points and 10 assists combined. 7 of those have happened just this season. Sabrina Ionescu, who's one of the best guards in the league, has 6 of those games in her entire career. Clark passed that total in a single season, and she still has games left to add to it. Then there's the assist record, and when you hear the number, it sounds almost unfair. Clark is the fastest player in WNBA or NBA history to reach 700 career assists. She got there in 83 games, not just the fastest among women, the fastest among everyone who's ever played professional basketball, men included. And it's not a one-time fluke either. She's also the fastest to 200, 300, 400, 500, and 600 assists. Every single checkpoint along the way, she got there faster than anyone who's ever played pro basketball. She's sitting at 30 double-doubles in 83 games, which puts her third all-time among guards in WNBA history. Guards who have been playing for a decade barely reach that number. And Clark's done it in a career that's barely 3 seasons long, one of which she missed significant time with injury. Add it all up, and you're looking at a player who's on pace to be the first player in WNBA history to average 20 points and 8 assists across a full season. She already has 30 games in her career hitting that combined mark, more than anyone else. Diana Taurasi and Skylar Diggins sit at 23 each for their entire careers. Clark's already passed that in a single season. 18 straight games scoring 20 or more points. That's Kelsey Mitchell's record, and it's a WNBA single-season record that just got logged in the history books. Think about that for a second. 18 games in a row, no cold nights, no off-shooting stretches where defenses figure you out and you go back to your role. Just bucket after bucket for over a month and a half of basketball. Every single night, Mitchell's name shows up in the scoring column with at least 20 points next to it. And it happened while the rest of her team was dealing with their own stuff. Ankle scares for Clark, different lineups being experimented with, back-to-back games where everyone's tired. Through all of that chaos, Mitchell just kept scoring. She didn't need perfect conditions. She didn't need the offense to be flowing perfectly. She just needed to get her opportunities, and she made them count. Against Dallas, that's exactly what happened again. Clark went down before halftime, and Indiana needed someone to keep the pace up while their best player was in the locker room getting looked at. Mitchell answered that call. She was scoring in bunches through the first half, making sure Dallas couldn't build any real cushion. She was the steadying force that kept Indiana close enough that, when Clark came back out in the third quarter, the fever could still take over. And then, when Clark did come back and took over the game, Mitchell didn't disappear either. She kept getting to her spots. She kept knocking down shots. She gave Indiana 2 scores that Dallas had to account for on every single possession. That's what makes an 18-game streak so hard to wrap your head around. Because teams scout you. Defenses adjust. Opponents throw different coverages at you every single night, trying to slow you down, trying to make you work for every bucket. Mitchell kept scoring 20 anyway, game after game, against every kind of defense the league could throw at her. That's not luck. That's not a hot stretch that evens out over time. That's a scorer who's figured out how to get her shot off no matter who's guarding her or what the game plan is designed to stop. She knows how to create space. She knows how to find her spots on the floor. She knows how to read defenses and attack the weaknesses. And for 18 straight games, nobody could stop her from doing exactly that. Now let's talk about Sophie Cunningham, because her record comes from a much different, much rougher place. Earlier this season, Cunningham became the center of a controversy after an incident involving Caitlin Clark and Deanie Carrington. Clark took a shot to the eye that turned into a league-wide conversation about physicality and protection, and Cunningham didn't stay quiet about it. She spoke up, she had opinions, and that made her a target in road arenas. The player that opposing crowds booed the loudest, the one that clips got cut around for weeks after. Instead of shrinking from that attention, instead of letting it affect her game, instead of becoming tentative or losing confidence, Cunningham turned it into the best shooting season of her career. She's hitting 45.5% from three this season. And that's on at least 100 attempts, which makes it the best three-point percentage in the entire WNBA. Not just among the Fever, not just among role players, the best mark in the whole league. That's not a small sample size fluke either. 100 attempts is enough volume to prove this is real, repeatable shooting, not a hot week that evens out over time. That number means something bigger than just a percentage on a stat sheet. Cunningham took a moment that turned her into a villain in road arenas and answered it by becoming the most efficient three-point shooter in the league. Every catch and shoot three she buries now carries a little bit of that story with it. The player that everybody wanted to boo, turning into the player that defenses can't leave open, not even for a second. Put Mitchell's streak and Cunningham's shooting title next to each other, and you've got two records that don't get the same headlines that Clark's numbers get. But they carried just as much weight on August 14th. Mitchell kept the offense alive. Cunningham spaced the floor so well that Dallas couldn't load up on anybody without paying for it from outside. Both of them are proof that this Fever team isn't a one-player show. When the game demanded somebody else step up, they answered in completely different ways. Then there's Tayasha Harris, and her performance might be the most improbable of all. 5 for 5 from three-point range. Perfect night. 0 misses. And it happened from a player who hadn't even made a single field goal in her previous 6 games combined. That's what makes Harris's performance so hard to explain away as just lucky shooting on a good night. She'd scored a total of 3 points across her last 6 outings before this game. And then out of nowhere, she goes perfect from deep against Dallas on the exact night that Indiana needed every bucket it could find. Harris isn't a name that casual fans know walking into this season. She's the backup point guard. She's the one who plays when Clark needs a break, or when the Fever want a different look running the offense. But on August 14th, she shot better than every single player on that floor, Fever, or Wings, and it wasn't even close. 5 attempts from 3, 5 makes. A career high in threes made in one game. Most of that damage landed in the fourth quarter, which is exactly when Indiana needed it most. She hit 4 of her 5 threes in that final frame alone, and the Fever outscored Dallas 35-21 in the fourth quarter to shut the door on any comeback attempt. That's not garbage time production. That's a bench guard hitting shots when the game still needed to be sealed. What happens when Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell both go quiet for a stretch and Dallas smells an opening? That's when you find out if a team actually has real depth, or if it just has 2 stars and a bunch of guys hoping to survive. Indiana had an answer sitting right there in the paint, and her name doesn't show up next to any of those 11 records that got broken on August 14th. Aaliyah Boston isn't chasing three-point titles or assist checkpoints. She's not the kind of player that shows up in highlight reels or gets featured in social media clips. She shows up every single night and does the same job down low, rebounding, finishing around the rim, and giving Indiana a post presence that Dallas simply doesn't have an answer for. And on a night when the guard positions were putting on a clinic, Boston was quietly providing the foundation that made everything else possible. Against the Wings, Boston puts up a double-double with 16 points and 10 rebounds. And 10 of those points come in the fourth quarter alone, exactly when Indiana needed to put the game away for good. She's not the one hitting threes. She's not creating for teammates. She's just doing what she does, scoring when the team needs her to, protecting the glass, giving Indiana extra possessions on the offensive boards. Because here's the thing about a team that actually has depth. When the outside shots aren't falling early in the game, when the three-point line goes cold and the guards aren't getting their looks, that's when the paint becomes essential. That's when you need a big who can get easy buckets, who can finish around the rim, who can go get her points without needing perfect conditions. Boston is that player for Indiana. And that interior presence gives Indiana a kind of balance that Dallas can't match no matter what they throw at Clark and Mitchell on the perimeter. Even on nights when the big three of Clark, Mitchell, and Boston isn't firing on all cylinders, that trio is still almost impossible to contain because you can't load up on one of them without opening a lane for the other two. You can't double Clark on the perimeter without leaving Boston free in the paint. You can't collapse on Boston in the post without opening up space for Mitchell to get her shot off. It's the kind of balance that only comes from having multiple weapons that can all hurt you in different ways. Boston's the steady piece in that group, the one who doesn't need a hot shooting night to make her presence felt because rebounds and paint touches show up regardless of how the jumpers are falling. She's going to be effective on nights when the offense is struggling. She's going to be effective on nights when defenses are playing perfect. She's just consistently there, consistently making the right play, consistently being the foundation that everything else is built on top of. Then there's Mikayla Timpson, who's stepping into a more significant role and showing exactly why the coaching staff trusts her out there. She's not putting up big numbers in the box score. She's not the one leading the scoring column or making a bunch of assists. But her energy shows up everywhere else. It shows up in loose balls. It shows up in extra effort on the boards. It shows up in the kind of hustle plays that don't always land in the box score but completely change the pace of a game. For a team thinking past just this season, for a team that's trying to build something that can last, that kind of production matters because you can't win a playoff series with only 3 or 4 scorers carrying the whole load every single night. You need role players who are going to show up with effort. You need guys who understand their role and execute it without complaining. You need depth that's not just about putting points on the board. When you put all of this together, when you look at Clark leading the way with historic production, Mitchell scoring consistently night after night, Cunningham shooting better than anyone in the league, Harris going perfect when her moment comes, Boston anchoring everything with her presence in the paint, and Timpson providing the effort and energy, you're looking at a team that's not just talented. You're looking at a team that's complete. And that completeness is what separates teams that have good regular seasons from teams that are actually built for a playoff push. Because in the playoffs, defenses get better, opponents adjust. You're playing the same team 3 or 4 times in a row, and they figure out how to take away your best player. When that happens, when your star player is being completely shut down and you can't score, your depth has to step up. Your role players have to make shots. Your bench guys have to contribute. Your team has to find ways to win without relying on one person to carry the entire load. Indiana proved on August 14th that they have that kind of depth. They proved that they're not dependent on Clark alone, even though Clark is clearly their best player and the most talented person on the floor. They proved that they can win games in different ways, that they can survive stretches where their stars aren't playing perfectly, and that they can get contributions from everywhere on their roster. That's the kind of team that wins in the playoffs. That's the kind of team that people should be worried about down the stretch. The storyline of Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers goes back way before either of them ever got paid to play professional basketball. This isn't something that the league manufactured for television ratings. This isn't some artificial beef cooked up by marketing departments trying to create drama. This is a rivalry that's been building since high school, when both of them were already being talked about as the next big thing in women's basketball. Years before Indiana ever drafted Clark. Years before Dallas ever landed Beckers. Years before either of them was a professional player earning a salary. That history is exactly why this rivalry works as well as it does. There's legitimacy to it. There's substance behind it. These aren't strangers being forced to compete for marketing purposes. These are 2 of the best players alive who have been going at each other since they were teenagers. They know each other's games. They understand what each other is capable of. And every time they step on the court against each other, they bring that knowledge, that history, and that competitive fire with them. On August 14th, Paige Bueckers proved she's no side character in this story. She finishes with 29 points, matching Clark's total exactly, plus 6 rebounds and 6 assists. She's forcing Indiana to adjust defensively in the 4th quarter just to slow her down. Every possession matters when Paige has the ball because she's capable of creating her own shot, of getting to the rim, of hitting big plays when her team needs them. She's not just Clark's foil. She's a real threat, a genuine superstar in her own right, and someone who's capable of matching Clark's scoring on any given night. That's what makes the rivalry so compelling. Because if Paige couldn't hang with Clark, if she wasn't a legitimate superstar, then this wouldn't be a rivalry. It would just be the best player in the league playing against someone else. But Paige is legitimate. She's putting up her own historic numbers. She's leading her own team. She's a threat to anyone she plays against, including Clark. So when these two share a court, when they go head-to-head, when they get to match up against each other, you're seeing two of the very best players in women's basketball compete against each other. And that's compelling television. The way they approach each other is interesting too. There's no trash talk. There's no manufactured drama between them. They just play basketball. They try to beat each other. They try to stop each other from doing what they do best. And then when it's over, they respect each other. That's the kind of rivalry that only happens when both players are confident enough in their own abilities that they don't need to create extra drama or talk. The basketball does all the talking. Paige matching Clark's 29 points, giving her team 6 rebounds and 6 assists, shows that she was engaged in this game, that she was fighting, that she was trying to lead her team to a win. She didn't back down from the moment. She didn't disappear when things got tough. She was there, competing, trying to lead Dallas to victory. But here's where the story gets weird. And it's the kind of weird that only happens when marketing and reality don't quite align perfectly. The promotional poster for this game, the image used to sell the matchup to fans, the graphic that was supposed to get people excited about watching Clark and Beckers go at each other. It doesn't feature Clark on the front. It doesn't feature Boston. It doesn't even feature Mitchell. Instead, the image used for this matchup features Lexi Hull and Raven Johnson, 2 players who weren't even the story of the night. Fans noticed immediately. It became its own conversation, completely separate from the basketball being played on the floor. People were talking about who was on the poster, who wasn't on the poster, why the league would choose to promote the game with players who had relatively minor roles. It's a strange footnote to a night that had this much history and this much talent on display. Between Boston and Timpson holding down the front court, between Clark and Paige picking up right where high school left off, this Fever season is going to get remembered for storylines that never once needed a marketing team's help. When you have genuine rivalry, when you have real storylines, when you have the kind of narratives that write themselves, sometimes the best marketing is just to let the game speak for itself. Let Clark and Paige go at each other. Let the records fall. Let the basketball do the talking. Because those things, those genuine moments, those real competitions, that's what sells. That's what people want to watch. The poster was a small thing in the context of everything else that happened on August 14th. It was barely a blip in the conversation. But it's worth noting because it represents a disconnect between what the league was trying to sell and what actually happened on the court. The game sold itself. The rivalry between Clark and Paige sold itself. The historic records being broken sold themselves. The poster didn't need to exist. The game was compelling enough without it. 11 records in one night doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because a team gets lucky. It doesn't happen because the opponent is terrible or because the conditions are perfect. 11 records happen because a hurt superstar walked back out in the third quarter instead of sitting down and being cautious. Because 3 teammates decided to match her energy instead of coasting. Because an entire roster showed up on the same night and executed at the highest level. Mitchell kept scoring. Cunningham kept shooting. Harris went perfect. And Clark just kept doing what she's done all season long, putting up numbers that don't fit into the traditional box score format. If this is the pace with Clark still working around injuries, still dealing with ankle scares, still not at 100% physically, then a fully healthy Fever team walking into the playoffs is a real problem for the rest of the league. Because playoff basketball is different, defenses get tighter, possessions matter more, every single game is for something real. And Indiana showed on August 14th that they can beat anybody when they're clicking. They can beat the team that beat them opening night. They can beat them so badly that they break the record book in the process. They can do it without their star player being fully healthy. They can do it with role players stepping up in moments that matter. That's the kind of team that wins championships. That's the kind of team that people should be scared of. That's the kind of team that has the pieces, has the talent, has the depth, and has the mental toughness to make a real playoff run. Caitlin Clark is on pace for a season that's never been done in women's basketball. Mitchell has proven she can score consistently night after night. Cunningham is shooting better than anyone. Boston is providing the foundation. And the entire roster showed they can step up when it matters. That's not a formula for a regular season team that gets knocked out in the first round. That's a formula for something much bigger. The fact that this happened against Dallas, the fact that it was a rematch of an opening night loss, the fact that it was Clark dealing with an injury and still coming back to dominate, all of that matters. All of that sends a message to the rest of the league. It says that Indiana isn't just talented, they're resilient. They're competitive. They're the kind of team that can overcome adversity and still find ways to win big. For the playoff push that's coming, for the games that actually matter, Indiana has shown that they have what it takes. They have a superstar who's playing at a level that's never been seen before. They have role players who can step up. They have depth that can sustain them through a long series, and they have the mental toughness to handle pressure moments. That's everything you need to make a real run. That's everything that matters when the season is on the line and every game is sudden death. Indiana isn't just another talented team. They're a team built to win in the playoffs. Keep watching because this Fever team is making history every single time they step on the floor. 11 records in a single game, and that's just the beginning. Caitlin Clark is rewriting what's possible in women's basketball, one night at a time. But what makes August 14th different from any other historic performance is that it wasn't just about one player. It was about an entire roster stepping up, about role players becoming essential, about a team proving they're built for something bigger than regular season wins. Mitchell showed she can carry the scoring load. Cunningham proved she's the most dangerous three-point shooter in the league. Harris demonstrated that preparation and confidence matter more than recent performance. Boston anchored everything with her presence. And Clark, dealing with an injury that could have ended her night, came back out and put on a clinic that will be studied for years to come. This is what a championship-caliber team looks like. This is what depth looks like. This is what happens when talent meets preparation, when history meets opportunity, and when a team decides that one bad loss months ago is worth avenging in historic fashion. The playoffs are coming. And if Indiana plays like this, if they have Clark healthy, if their role players continue stepping up, if they maintain this level of execution, the rest of the league should be very worried. Because they just showed that they can't just beat anybody. They can beat them badly enough to break records while doing it.